Her access card ceased to function at precisely 6:02 a.m. on a Thursday, not 1 second earlier, not 1 second later. She was standing before the day center's primary entrance, a thermos in one hand and her ID in the other, while the small green light flashed a defiant red, as if mocking her. Odette didn't swear, or even sigh. She simply gazed at it, completely motionless, as though challenging it to repeat the insult. It did, once, then twice. Then it went dark. She made no further attempts, because Odette was already certain. You see, most colleagues knew her simply as the keycard woman, imagining she distributed lanyards and configured the entry panels with some ancient tool and sheer willpower. For 18 years, she had been a fixture within this corporate behemoth, tucked away in basements that vibrated with the hum of servers and the smell of old coffee. She possessed keys, both physical and cryptographic, that had been forgotten by everyone else. If you were to pull away the sheetrock in the security corridor, you might have discovered her initials scratched onto a conduit. She was, in essence, the access system, not because an organizational chart declared it, but because somewhere in the endless cycle of software patches and botched security audits, the infrastructure had gradually become reliant on her. No one took notice, until Lachlan showed up. Lachlan arrived like a walking marketing slogan, slick, loud, and overflowing with tech bro jargon. He carried the scent of high-priced disappointment, fresh from Inseed or Booth or whichever elite factory produced these MBA-wielding disruptors. He labeled himself an optimizer, a term whose meaning was entirely lost on her. He had the audacity to use the term digital synergy in a conversation with Odette. She stared at him for so long that he genuinely inquired if she was all right. She was perfectly fine. He simply wasn't someone worth the effort of blinking. The teasing began around his second week. Small, cutting remarks exchanged across the open plan office by contractors in their 20s who believed legacy system was code for a baby boomer awaiting a pension. Someone once left a sticky note on Odette's monitor. Does the spirit in the machine require a caffeine refill? Ha ha ha. A manager dismissed it as a morale-boosting jest. Odette didn't bother to take it down. She just scanned it and filed it away. She filed everything. Next came the meetings behind closed doors. She knew every square foot of that complex and the precise spot to stand, to overhear Lachlan making statements like, "We can eliminate 2 positions in access control by migrating to Synapse Core. And besides, Odette is practically retired already. 1 foot out the door, was she? Then why was she still the one troubleshooting badge malfunctions at 3 a.m. that had prevented a 4-act breach just last quarter? Yet, she remained silent. She just sat in her small domain of network cables and ID printers, hearing her allocated hours shrink and her name fade from project documentation. She had been officially designated non-essential. Then her card was deactivated, not due to a system malfunction, not by some accident. It was an order from Lachlan. She had discovered the audit log 2 days prior, buried beneath a cascade of approvals from new employees who couldn't navigate a simple JSON loop. The change request was labeled Deactivation, Asset Legacy 113. Her ID was signed off by a third-party contractor out of Delaware. She hadn't been formally terminated, just systematically erased. So when that small light turned red, she didn't phone human resources or march into Lachlan's glass-walled office to demand an answer. She got into her vehicle, started the engine, went home, and waited. Lachlan called it modernization, a word he uttered with the self-satisfaction of a man who has never soldered a circuit board or traced a sporadic error at 2 a.m. The CIO sent him a single, terse message. "You assured me Synapse Core would protect us." Finally, at 12:41 p.m., Lachlan opened a new tab in his Gmail and began to type. Subject: Urgent. Assistance required. To oharcourtprotonmail.com. Body: Odette, I believe we are experiencing significant access control failures. I would like to request your assistance in resolving this matter. Please respond at your earliest convenience. He waited for an hour, then 2, nothing. Then at 4:22 p.m., a single reply appeared. My consulting fee is $400 per hour. Billed in advance. Non-refundable. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. Just a rate, as if she were giving a quote for pest control. Lachlan didn't pause. He immediately wired $4,000. She replied 5 minutes later with a link to a private session. When the video call connected, Odette was on the screen, holding a coffee mug emblazoned with "World's Most Mediocre Employee." She showed no emotion, no hint of triumph. She simply said, "Open the override port on node B244. The fallback script is awaiting permission." Lachlan hurried to follow her instructions. 10 minutes later, a single zone reactivated. Just one. Sector 2, which housed the main diagnostics rack. He gasped for air like a man who had just surfaced from underwater. "Thank God," he whispered. "Can you fix the rest now?" Odette's gaze was unwavering. "That was not our agreement. But we still can't access the critical storage. The backup power is failing." "Per hour," she stated again. "And I have only billed you for one." She ended the call. He tried to call back. No answer. He emailed her again. She replied 3 hours later. "Further assistance will require a new contract. Terms are available upon request." Lachlan leaned back in his chair, drenched in a cold sweat, as the building he had confidently claimed to have optimized continued to suffocate under the weight of its own unacknowledged design. The building didn't need a savior. It needed its ghost to return, and Odette was no longer haunting for free. At 7:12 a.m. the following day, Lachlan's inbox pinged like an alarm. The subject line read, "Restoration Proposal. Terms attached." The body of the email contained a single sentence. "If you wish for the building to function again, review the PDF." He opened it, half expecting to see a ransom demand scrawled in digital crayon. What he found instead was a pristine, meticulously drafted contract. 3 pages, completely airtight from a legal standpoint. The title, Executive Consulting Agreement, Odette Harcourt. It began with an unequivocal clause. Odette would be reinstated as Chief Access Security Architect, a position that hadn't existed before, but would now report directly to the Board of Directors, bypassing Lachlan entirely. She was to be given complete veto authority over any third-party vendors involved with the access, authentication, or facilities management systems. All of them, including Synapse Core. Oh, and retroactive hazard pay. Lachlan's heart rate surged into the triple digits. He called the legal department. Legal's response was, "You have no grounds to object, and you are also a fool." He called the board. They were already in a video conference. 10 grim-faced executives spread across 10 different, irate time zones. The chairman's voice was as rough as gravel. "Can she fix it?" "Yes," Lachlan managed to say. "Then be quiet and sign it." The digital signatures were processed before Odette had even finished her breakfast. By 11:45 a.m., she was standing at the Datacenter's main entrance once more, with the same thermos in one hand and the same deactivated badge in the other. This time, however, the door swung open for her. 2 interns held it, treating her like visiting royalty. She moved without haste, not even glancing at the card readers that were still flashing red in most areas. Like guilty children, Odette walked through the complex as if it were her personal sanctuary, heading directly to the old access control terminal, the one they had attempted to retire 3 times, but had never managed to fully replace. It booted up in 30 seconds. She connected her ThinkPad, opened 6 separate command windows, and her fingers began to fly across the keyboard as if she were unearthing ancient relics. In the first hour, she reactivated the backup loop authentication daemon. In the second, she unraveled Lachlan's vendor-created mess, deleting a Synapse Core module named Sync Godino that had been sending recursive requests to an inactive IP address in Luxembourg. The cooling systems came back online. The card readers chirped to life. The biometric backups confirmed their authorization. By 1:46 p.m., the access logs had stabilized. Server temperatures began to fall. Employees started to return to the building, looking like the survivors of a long siege. Odette didn't utter a word. She simply printed a single sheet of paper, carried it down the hallway, and placed it on Lachlan's desk. He looked as though he hadn't slept in 2 days. His shirt was a mess of wrinkles. His eyes were bloodshot, and his tie was draped over a nearby chair. She didn't stay for him to read it. She just said, "This is your new training manual," and gestured to the bold 16-point font title, "Redundancy is not resilience." Odette turned and walked away, her steps slow and measured, each one a lesson he would never be able to forget. In her wake, the building seemed to take its first deep breath in 3 days. It was alive, but it was changed, because now it was hers. Odette's resignation was not a public affair. There was no formal announcement, no goodbye party with cake, and no sentimental card passed around by colleagues who had never bothered to learn her last name. It happened just as she did everything else, with precision, without fanfare, and with devastating consequences for the unprepared. Her departure email arrived at exactly 7 a.m., time-stamped to the second. The subject line was simply, "Final credential termination. O. Harcourt." There was no body text, only an attachment. The PDF within was 147 pages long. Its title page read, "How to Dismantle Your Infrastructure in 1 Week, a Post-Mortem on Ignorance and Hubris, by Odette Harcourt, CSA. The report was unflinching. In stark, clinical language, it detailed how every critical system in that building had depended not on cutting-edge protocols, but on trust, human judgment, and a network of interconnected legacy workarounds that she had quietly sustained. She included time-stamped proof of Lachlan's directives, the deletion of her credentials without a contingency plan, the reckless implementation of Synapse Core without adequate testing, the removal of Tier 2 backup daemons without proper verification, and the deliberate exclusion of her from strategic discussions, despite her 18 years of root-level access. She even included a screenshot from a Slack channel where Lachlan had quipped that Odette probably still thinks punch cards are a thing. That particular slide went viral because, of course, Odette had uploaded a redacted version. She removed the company's name and replaced its logos with solid black rectangles, but the substance of the report remained unaltered. She published it anonymously on a specialized sysadmin forum under the username keycard.spectre47. It spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared on R Sysadmin, Hacker News, LinkedIn, and 3 exclusive Discord servers. On Reddit, it was hailed as the most masterful revenge by omission since the printer spooler incident of 2016. LinkedIn users with titles like Infrastructure Visionary attempted to identify the company at the heart of the story. Some made accurate guesses. Others didn't care, because the narrative was about more than just one company. It was a cautionary tale. By the 3rd day, the firm's own clients were quoting passages from Odette's report back to them. By the 5th day, Lachlan had been removed from the Access Oversight Committee. His title was altered, and his office was moved. There was no public statement. He was simply gone. And Odette? She didn't react at all. She was already working as a consultant, full-time, globally. Her first client was a multinational corporation that contacted her after reading her report and posed a single question: "Can you show us how to avoid making this mistake from the beginning?" She didn't reply with a yes. She sent them her rate sheet. They paid her invoice in full. At home, her office had a new feel. It was brighter, more open, but one item was displayed prominently on a shelf, protected by glass: her old access card, the one that had flashed red. A brass plaque beneath it was engraved with a single line: "You should have understood my function before you deemed me unnecessary." The small light had been dark for a long time, but Odette, she was only just beginning. Under humming fluorescent lights, Odette had witnessed buzzwords appear and vanish, But this felt different. This time, the budget reductions were accompanied by official press announcements, a new software package from a vendor with a trendy logo, and a presentation filled with charts that were nonsensical to anyone who had ever seen a card reader fail during a data sync. Synapse Core was its name. Entirely cloud-based, zero trust, AI-driven, blockchain-infused nonsense. Lachlan displayed it proudly, nodding in agreement as salespeople spouted phrases like proactive compliance architecture and autonomous threat response. Odette had examined the system's back-end. It couldn't even manage daylight saving time without corrupting half the timestamp functions. Nevertheless, no one consulted her. Her workdays grew quieter, unnervingly so. The systems she had once managed began to be phased out, shifted to experimental projects and temporary setups. Her workload of support tickets didn't just decrease, it evaporated. One week, she had 38 active issues. The following week, only 3, all delegated to rookie technicians, contractors from firms Lachlan praised as agile and cost-effective. Odette knew them for what they were, expendable. Then they dismissed Harvey. Harvey was the type of fellow who referred to every computer as a unit and still put masking tape labels on his USB drives. He had worked alongside Odette since before the company's last major restructuring, back when the access system ran on a cobbled-together SQL server she kept operational with ingenuity and daily hope. Lachlan terminated him with a cheerful email expressing gratitude for his years of service and a polite request to return his badge. A week later, Esme was also let go. She was being realigned, they said. That was the new corporate euphemism. Realigned, as if she were a misaligned shelving unit. Odette didn't shed a tear or put up a fight. She simply arrived each day and documented everything, silently and meticulously, as she had always done. And then, one morning, she attempted to scan her card to enter Sector 2, her own sector, and the door remained shut. Beep. Red light. She tried again. Beep. Red. She stood there just as before, her eyes blinking once, then twice, with the slow deliberation of a predator. Try one more time, the security guard suggested, a young man who likely thought SCSI was a cartoon character. She turned and proceeded to HR. The office had the scent of peppermint hand cream and artificial foliage. Priya, the HR manager, looked up as though Odette had interrupted her from watching a video. "My badge isn't working," Odette stated plainly. Priya blinked, as if struggling to place the name. "Oh, you'll need to speak with Lachlan about that. Of course." No apology, no clarification, no acknowledgement that Odette was still under an active contract, no notice of termination, no offboarding procedures. Just, speak with Lachlan. Odette did not speak with Lachlan. She walked out, deliberately. No theatrical pauses, no slamming of doors, no declarations of, "You will regret this." She didn't leave a resignation letter, didn't collect her framed photograph of the team from the 2009 upgrade project, and didn't even sign out of her computer. She just departed. And upon arriving home, she didn't open a bottle of wine or vent on social media. She took out her old ThinkPad, launched a command terminal, and began to observe. Because if Lachlan believed that deactivating her badge meant she was truly gone, he was on the verge of learning the distinction between access and control. The first card reader failure occurred on Tuesday morning at 9:17 a.m., a clean break. Sector 4 denied access to 3 contractors attempting to reach a cooling unit. The reader blinked red, then went dark. They assumed it was a momentary power issue. A system reboot restored function for exactly 6 minutes. Then, Sector 7 went down. Following that, the freight entrance refused to open for the hardware delivery crew, who sat in the parking lot for 2 hours before anyone realized they were still there. Lachlan attributed it to integration friction and pointed to the new cloud synchronization protocols. His voice grew more strained in meetings, though he maintained his polished MBA tone, using words like latency, differential, and infrastructure maturity. By Thursday, 5 card readers were inoperative. The Synapse Core monitoring system was incessantly reporting false alarms and unrecognized device IDs. The new technicians were clueless, so they resorted to rebooting the system repeatedly. One of them inadvertently reset an entire segment of access points without verifying the failover protocols, which disabled authentication for half the biometric scanners in the East Wing. A vendor became trapped in a sub-basement stairwell for 26 minutes. The emergency release mechanism had seized up from rust. No one had checked it since Odette was phased out. Throughout this ordeal, Lachlan kept up a confident facade. "It's merely a transitional phase," he assured the board's representative. Odette's system had undocumented peculiarities. "We are bringing it into alignment with specifications." Peculiarities. That was his term for the custom bash scripts she had developed over the years to prevent phantom devices from overwhelming the access logs. That was his word for the tiered protocol she had engineered to detect fraudulent badge cloning attempts from external sources. He had no grasp of the system, but the system had a perfect grasp of him. Every automated audit, every timeout signal, every delayed synchronization. Odette had discreetly tagged them in log files. Over a decade of improvised IT solutions. They were still present, still active, but now they were unmonitored, and gradually they started to fray. One of the junior system administrators, Rowan, a perpetually anxious young man with energy drink stains on his sweatshirt, finally reached out to her on LinkedIn. "Hey, Odette, sorry to bother you, but did you ever fix that Tier 3 script loop that used to activate when badge node B244 went out of sync? I think it might be happening again. The logs are a mess." No response. Odette saw the message, of course. She even let her cursor hover over the reply field, but she wrote nothing. Instead, she opened her local terminal and observed as 5 different systems concurrently raised a flag for an unknown dependency timeout. She took a sip of her coffee and refreshed the screen. 3 more had failed. Leaning back, she stretched her neck. The system wasn't failing. It was coming apart at the seams, and she hadn't laid a finger on it. It happened at 4:07 a.m., like a stroke, abrupt, final, and at first, unnervingly silent. The security monitor, usually a grid of steady green lights, froze in place. Then, it transformed into a solid wall of red. Every single card reader, offline, from the executive suites to the loading bay, from the biometric scanner near the thermal array to the ancient service elevator that always sounded as if it resented its own existence. All dead. The first person to discover the issue was the night janitor. He couldn't get into the supply closet to restock paper towels. He called building management, who assumed he had accidentally dialed them. By the time the morning shift started arriving, the parking lot resembled a Best Buy on Black Friday, with engineers, contractors, and administrative staff, all clustered around doors that refused to budge. The panic didn't begin with a shout. It started with a Slack message. "Is anyone else locked out?" Followed by another. "Guys, my badge isn't working, and I need to reboot Node Group Delta before the update script pushes." Then, "None of the backups are kicking in." At 4:13 a.m., the access control server started logging over 10,000 access denial requests per minute. The log file swelled to 4 GD in 12 minutes. The system couldn't rotate the logs quickly enough. They began to overwrite themselves. And then, the scripts started to loop. Autonomous badge synchronization scripts that Odette had created years ago, which were never properly integrated into Synapse Core, began to call on obsolete authentication pathways. Those pathways were no longer there. Each attempt failed, then retried, and then retried again. There was no fail-safe, only an infinite loop. The CPU usage on the badge server shot up to 99% and remained there. At 4:19 a.m., the internal diagnostics for the physical security system flagged an incomplete dependency tree. That was Odette's creation. A protective measure, a digital fail-safe. No one else knew it existed. The secondary authentication systems, biometric, keypad, and NFC, were linked to a sequential initialization process that needed Odette's private credential hash to complete its boot sequence. A hash no one possessed, because Lachlan had deleted her user profile. A masterstroke. Emergency access codes? Useless. They relied on the same verification cycle. The IT contractors started texting Lachlan directly. He didn't reply at first. Then he attempted to reboot the badge servers remotely from his tablet. There was no response. The network's subnet was caught in a loop storm, with requests endlessly failing and overwhelming the switches. The building itself was hermetically sealed. Even the fire doors couldn't be opened manually without breaching OSHA regulations, which the company had spent 6 months working to comply with. Inside the building, the handful of employees who had stayed overnight were now trapped. They gathered in the break room by the vending machines, trying to stay calm. A junior technician tried to call the vendor for Synapse Core. They were fast asleep in Singapore. And Odette? She was on her porch, wrapped in a fleece blanket, observing the sunrise as if it were a film premiere. Her ThinkPad was open next to her, its battery full, its CPU at rest, with logs scrolling down the screen as quietly as rosary beads. She hadn't lifted a finger. She hadn't issued a single command. She had simply let go. The system had always been dependent on her. Now, it was proving it. At 6:12 a.m., the first server rack exceeded its thermal limits. It wasn't due to a power failure or even excessive use. The automated airflow system that managed the cooling protocols was linked to internal zoning, zones that were now registered as inaccessible because of the badge system failure. And when the cooling daemon couldn't confirm physical access compliance for the emergency vent override, it switched to its safe mode, which meant it did nothing. Server room 3 hit 103 degrees F in 8 minutes. By 6:30, the temperature in rack cluster delta surpassed 109 degrees EF. Blade servers began to power down to prevent damage. Remote management tools started to time out. Monitoring dashboards went blank. The Synapse Core AI identified it as a suspicious hardware event. Lachlan was asleep on his ergonomic monstrosity of a mattress when his phone began to vibrate with the intensity of a possessed jackhammer. By the time he picked up, the COO was already deep into a string of expletives and was demanding a complete incident report. Words like client breach and legal exposure began to circle like sharks in bloody water. By 7:02 a.m., 2 enterprise clients had filed for SLA violations. One had just lost access to their repository of medical records. Another's cloud service had failed to complete overnight backups for 4,000 users. The financial repercussions alone were projected to be in the 6-figure range per hour. Still, no one could enter the building. Someone proposed smashing a window. The legal department immediately vetoed that idea. There were liability concerns, not to mention that some of the windows were made of triple reinforced security glass, designed to stop small caliber bullets. The VP of Infrastructure summoned a professional locksmith, who chuckled until he understood they were serious. He then gave a quote of $7,000 and a 4-hour estimated arrival time. Lachlan accepted. It didn't make a difference. He just needed something, anything, that resembled making progress. At 7:24 a.m., a system administrator in Nebraska noticed something was profoundly amiss when even the off-site backup relay failed to activate. The data center's vital sign, its health check script, wasn't executing. This was because it required a physical key confirmation that Odette had implemented after a near-catastrophic incident 5 years earlier. It was her innovation, never officially documented. Too convoluted, Lachlan had remarked. By 8:11 a.m., Lachlan was on an emergency conference call with the board, attempting to justify why an entire Tier 3 data center, supposedly guaranteed for 99.9999% uptime, was completely non-functional on a Monday morning, with no evidence of a cyber attack, no natural disaster, and no employee sabotage. Except sabotage doesn't always involve a crowbar. Sometimes it's simply an absence, Sometimes it's the woman you neglected to include in the vendor onboarding meeting because you decided she wasn't strategic. Odette was in her kitchen, one leg folded beneath her, sipping on convenience store tea and watching the local news. Her cat was fast asleep beside her, oblivious to the world, much like the badge server in Rack E14. On the television, there was B-roll footage of worried employees gathered outside a glass-fronted monolith. No one was speaking to the press. No names were given. Just a simple 2-line caption: Major tech firm experiences unexplained data center outage. Cause under investigation. Odette smiled, not out of a sense of vindication, but because, for a change, they had no one to point the finger at, and that, in its own way, was justice in its purest form. By 9:00 a.m., Lachlan's forehead was gleaming like a glazed ham in a steam room. His tie was gone. His voice, typically as smooth as a TED Talk, was now cracking like an old record. He had exhausted every option. The Synapse Core vendor had passed him through 3 different departments before casually mentioning that physical access issues were not covered by their cloud service agreement. "Local hardware is your responsibility," a voice chirped from a call center in Estonia. He slammed the phone down so forcefully that its casing cracked. By 10:15, he had brought in a forensic IT company with a name that sounded like a Bond villain's investment firm, Kestrel Forensics. They billed at $1,800 an hour and wore suits like they were tactical gear. After an hour of scanning the network, their lead consultant, a man named Gideon with a Bluetooth earpiece and an aversion to humility, stated, "It appears someone designed the system dependencies to self-destruct." Lachlan blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your system is actively cannibalizing itself, and we lack the root privileges to halt it." "Who engineered this?" Lachlan swallowed, his throat dry. At 11:03, he tried Odette's old office phone. The line rang 7 times before connecting to her voicemail. "You've reached Odette. If this is a badge-related emergency, it is likely already too late." He stared at the handset, as if it had personally insulted his family. By noon, he was frantically pacing in the stairwell, his tie discarded, his hair disheveled, muttering into his phone between urgent emails and Slack notifications. HR was disavowing any responsibility. The legal team was now involved. The facilities department had threatened to walk off the job